Let's get down to the third and final session of this mobility conclave that we have here. This is going to be the most exciting session because we have all the people that we talked about that are doing things in this sector sitting right here and their experiences of it. I don't know if you sat through Amitabh Khan's presentation. Very dynamic, very optimistic, seemed to suggest that we are on the verge of a revolution. And let's get a ground reality from that, because the government has done or claims to have done a lot of things for the sector. Fame, is it fame or is it infamous? That's the big question in this session. So I'm going to kick off with Rajeev Chabba, whose advertising has sort of stormed India in terms of the cars that they are putting out, and whether that is living up to the reputation. Let's get specific. We're going to give you about 3-4 minutes to make your points. I'd rather that you make your points, and let's get into some of the issues that you face here, so that we are looking ahead. I'm sure there are positives, and there are plenty of them, but what are the things we need to do if we're going to get to what FAME sets, which is saying that we will have something like 5 million electric vehicles produced every year. And by a certain point, 2030, it seems really an illusion at the moment that 30% of all our vehicles would be electrically driven things. So let's get to some of the key issues on that and your experiences while doing that. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. So I think I've got 3 minutes. Unfortunately, I have the habit of loving my voice and I can continue. So you please stop me.
Well,
right.
I'll put my stop
so 2-3 things. I think, though the question is about the FAME, but let me say, somewhere you have to start. Most of the guys I think here are from technology side, R&D side and all. So we need to have the commercialization of the new technologies, and that's the way to progress. Now, at this point of time, on the electric side, there are lots of naysayers too. I think we have converted most of them, but still I would make 2-3 points. Number one, when some guys say do well-to-wheel kind of efficiency and see whether it makes sense or not, or you are shifting from oil to fossil fuels for generating electricity. I think the jury is, in my opinion, is out, and you can do all kind of research and data, but at least from factory to the customer and then the resale of the battery or the reusage of the battery, if you see that part, I think that's a no-brainer. Yes, oil and electricity production kind of a thing we can always review, but you have to make a start. Like we talked about it, in electricity, at least you can go to the renewables at some point of time. So there's a scope. We can't produce 100% of oil internally in India, but in energy, we have a choice, we can do it. Second, they talk about, okay, instead of importing oil, probably you're going to import batteries. So instead of Middle East dependency, you will depend on maybe China. But again, you don't import oil from one country, right? You have your hedges, you have your foreign exchange hedge, you import from the basket of, you make a basket of oil from various countries, and that's how you do the hedging. In battery, you can import from Japan or China or Korea. We can have change of technology. Somebody spoke just now in the previous session that if the government direction is clear, if commercialization strategy is clear, we can do our own R&D. We can move from lithium-ion technology to something else in future. So that's all possible. At least you're trying to take future in your hands. So I'm a convert. This is the way to go. Now, they say, why now? Lots of guys ask me a question and still keep asking question. Your second car, first car was MG Hector, second car is this EV. Why are you getting into EV at this point of time? So I say, listen, somewhere somebody has to make a start. Unfortunately, in our country, demand gets generated first, supply follows. Unlike China, where supply gets, infrastructure gets done, and then demand follows. And that's true in almost all the infrastructural issues in our country. So here also, let's try to generate demand. Last point, MG ZS EV, which we have launched. Guess what? Mahindra, Tata, and Hyundai put together last year sold 2,000 cars. We just announced the price range. We got 2,800 bookings in 3 weeks' time. It means there's a demand. Okay, there's a high-end guys, but somewhere somebody has to start. And we are giving the charger with every car because there's a huge charging infrastructure issues. On the government last point, I think let's look at the cake first. GST is 5%. That's the cake. Cherry is FAME. Okay, now we haven't got cherry yet, but that's fine, but we have got the cake. So I think we need to make the start, and we are seriously converted into this issue.
That's really optimistic, and congratulations on sort of beating out the big guys so quickly on this. I'm sure they must be gnashing their teeth on this. But Sohinder, let's come to you, and you've head spokesperson for the Society for Manufacturing of Electric Vehicles. You represent Hero, which was a hero in terms of two-wheelers all these years. Still, I think, the world's largest manufacturer of two-wheelers. The big transition is moving two-wheelers, because that's the mass transportation that we have at the moment if we leave out buses, into the electric segment. What are the challenges of that, if you can just sum that up, and then we can come to the specifics after that.
Yeah, thank you. At the company level, we'll be doing 50,000 this year. And
as compared to your total sales of petrol-driven...
20 million is total, and we do only 5.5. So imagine we are at 0.01 or some percent, so I don't talk about those figures. But even collectively today,
Sorry,
collectively, the industry would be doing 1.2 lakh electric two-wheelers this year. I personally feel between now, like 50,000 to something like 1 million that I have to do. What is the journey and what is the gap and how do we cover it up?
Good point.
For me, it's the customer who is sitting on the fence. Is he still trusting electric mobility? Is he finding value in it? Or is he waiting for somebody else to take it and then he will take it? So for me, I think things are falling in place with Bajaj, with TVS, and so many others coming into the picture in two-wheelers, but he's waiting for somebody else to take a jump into it. So it's not a lifestyle product as yet, for which anybody would just pay premium and buy it for the sake of experimentation. It's an economy-based value for money product, two-wheelers generally are. So that's where the wait happens. That this guy who has bought it, has he made some economically wise decision? Has he got total cost of ownership advantages out of it? So unless that is established, unless the trust comes, this gap will not be filled up immediately. So the catalyst behind it is how to fill up this gap. How to quickly create a trust that, yes, if you bought something at a little higher price than a petrol bike, you will end up saving much more than what you have invested in. That won't come out of calculation, that won't come out of our 600 network talking about it or me talking about it. It'll be out of that 1 million users in a concentrated place talking to each other and a positive word of mouth spreading about it. So that's where it lies. The first hurdle of creating a bigger volume has to be pushed. It won't be customer adoption. And for the push, we have been telling, like there are various things. Industry has to do something, government has to do many things, and even the ecosystem has to be created around it. So 3-4 things that can create this type of a first 1, 2, 3 million vehicles are a little bit of mandating on the business side. The deliveries, the courier companies and everybody, they can be advised or mandated to convert 10% of the fleet into electric, so there is something on the road which is happening, and there is a visibility on that. The second is even little bit of front loading of incentives and subsidies that are being given. Let's not spread over 6 years. Let's do it in 2 years, finish it off. So there is a type of equilibrium between a petrol vehicle and an electric vehicle for some time, and there's a rush to buy the electric vehicle because the pricing is going to go up. And third is the industry, which has already jumped into it, a lot of products, which has happened. So that's a good step that has happened, and that has surely resulted into larger plate. Few other things are awareness. Awareness is not happening, and if I talk like a marketing language. People say it's to give it a pinch of salt. But if government talks about it, if policy talks about awareness part of it, I have been advocating under Swachh Bharat, let's talk clean air, under clean air, let's take electric mobility. And one sure way of getting cleaner air.
We're going to come back to you, Sohinder, on this. You've run out of your 3 minutes. So let's come to Vikram Gulati. And representing Toyota, spokesperson as well for them. Now, let's take specifics in terms of the motors you're making, the engines, the product that you're doing. How much of that is currently Indian when we get to electric vehicles or hybrid that you're doing? And what is the challenges you've faced as a company? 2 or 3 points that you think need to be talked about.
2, 3 things. Globally, we've been in this space of electrifications well before anybody. Started off in the early 90s. Currently, if we talk about the electrified world, which includes hybrid plug-ins and EVs, we are the single largest player, 43% market share globally. Now, if you come to electric vehicles or any technology per se, it's basically the core issue is customer acceptance. And for electric mobility, we all know that there are challenges, which I'll not elaborate on, but the fact is, how do you overcome these challenges? And you give a value proposition to the consumer. Now, when it comes to challenges and value proposition, 2, 3 things that we have to understand. One, it's not same across the world. Different markets have different value propositions. They have very different challenges. For instance, in India, our vehicle kilometer traveled is much less as compared to, let's say, in US. Temperatures are much higher, therefore the implication of that is fast charging is a completely different dynamic. We are probably very innovative, so maybe a battery swapping kind of a thing which is now coming through in India may actually be an India unique solution. So first message really is you have to look at the Indian context and the Indian solutions designed for India. Second thing is, not all segments are equally placed in terms of adoption from a consumer perspective, and I think that's been elaborated in the previous segment where people have talked about three-wheelers and two-wheelers. Now, without elaborating on that more, I'll just like to go on the enablers which I think are going to be the key for India to make a really impactful shift, and not just some niche segments or niche numbers. Mass, let's talk about mass. Unless you talk about mass, it doesn't really add up to anything. Now, if you really got to look at making an impact on shift towards electrification, you've got to look at Make in India, you've got to look at design in India, you've got to look at doing R&D in India, you've got to look at skilling because totally new skill sets are required in the entire value chain. And that's where, if you are looking at all of these issues, to me, three things are critical. One, you have to leverage the existing globally competitive industry that you have. It's a huge asset. India, in terms of not only the OEMs, but more importantly in terms of the supply side, is globally hugely competitive. You've got to bring that on board. Yes, startups will have a role, very important role, but these guys are going to be the, probably the differentiator in terms of pace. Second one is you've got to really look at very impactful policies. Mr. Kant mentioned about CAFE. CAFE example, just 2 minutes, 1 minute.
No,
CAFE example globally hasn't really worked out in terms of tightening. Europe is a classical example.
Will you define to audience when you say CAFE, because this is jargon, this is all bread and butter for you, but for a lot of people it isn't.
Corporate average fuel efficiency, the kind of fuel efficiency you got to achieve on an average basis for the industry. That's a target that you have to set and that you have to meet. Europe has set a very ambitious target. 7 years ago, they're not meeting it, they're finding it difficult, although demographics support it. But if you don't do anything, that's also not right. So what you can learn is something that's been done elsewhere in the world. For example, Thailand. Thailand bases its taxation, GST equivalent, to carbon emission. It's a very fantastic, very simplistic idea. So if you consume more fuel, or if you consume fuel at all, you pay more. And that's what Mr. Kant was saying, the polluter pays, or fossil fuel user pays, or whatever. So that's different from CAFE. So carbon-based taxation has put Thailand on the fast track of electrification, although they came into this space much later. What that really does is it allows you to do whatever you want to do. Because XEVs, whether they are whatever shape they are, hybrids, plug-ins, hydrogen, or pure EV, they have the common EV parts. The powertrain is common. Therefore, you can do business viability and investment. Second one is, how do you manage the technology evolution that's going to happen? That's going to be very disruptive. I think this bit about being neutral helps you do that. Third, I think where Mr. Kant again mentioned, and I'll take it from his leaf, he mentioned about hydrogen. We too believe hydrogen is really going to be the fuel for the future. It's clean, it's much better, it's linked to renewable energy. We're not too far away from that. We may be very far away as a country from an ecosystem for EVs in terms of battery manufacturing, parts manufacturing, but we are not too far away when it comes to hydrogen. I think that's one area we really need to focus on, besides skilling and R&D and design in India.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you. And not last, and not least either, is Vikram Mishra, who is head of Lithium, or external head of external relations for Lithium. And I think that's one of the big things. He's already talking of hydrogen, so he's pulling the business out of you. But coming to looking at storage and batteries particularly, what is the edge that India should have in this? Are we completely import dependent? Has there been any R&D investment that we have made that will make us leaders of the future, or are we going to be continuing to be dependent on others? Slaves to others, if I could use a harder word.
Sure. Just to clarify, although we have a name Lithium,
you're not doing Lithium.
We have nothing to do with battery manufacturing or battery storage as such.
Sorry.
But what we do with Lithium, and that's why the name we chose in 2015, when it was idea, when it was a vision that the future of mobility is shared, connected, and electric. Even in 2020, we are talking about future is shared credit electric. I think this is fundamentally wrong. I think the present is electric. It's about here and now. And we have converted the idea in 2015 to reality in the last 5 years. We are currently managing 1,100 electric vehicles in 9 cities, serving 30 plus corporate clients. We have done about 100 million electric kilometers and abated 20,000 metric tons of CO2. This is equivalent of addition of 100 plus Lodi gardens in New Delhi. So we have already converted the idea into reality. If we look back in terms of what worked for us and why we are the India's largest electric fleet operator in the four-wheeler category, is one, picking the right market segment. And we chose corporate employee transport service as the preferred market for entry for corporate adoption. Why we choose that? For 3 reasons. One is the size. The size of $4 billion market size is a huge. The whole taxi market in India is $15 billion, and we picked that cream layer of 25%. The second is simplicity of the operations. For electric vehicle to work, you need to predict the route, you need to predict the time of charging, so you can always predict when you already know in advance how the transport pattern is going to have for the corporates. And the third, I think corporates are already doing a lot in terms of sustainability initiatives. They are worried about the transport carbon footprint, and electric mobility fits right into the sustainability agenda of the corporates. And combined with the renewable focus, electric mobility will be a huge enabler for the sustainability goals. But like with every business, there come challenges. And the challenges are not that no one knows about it. It's about cost, it's about the range anxiety, and it's all about the charging. We said we'll convert all these challenges into opportunities. To manage the cost, we start making the fleet run about 300 kilometers per day. We said we'll sweat the asset, not the driver. So we hired 2 drivers per vehicle, and we are able to create the value for our customers. We are able to create value for our shareholders. Then they say, oh, what about the charging infra?
Can you spend the next minute while you have described your company well and what it does, what are the lessons you've learned, 1, 2, 3, in terms of what needs to be done? Since you're running such a vast fleet of electric vehicles, what have been the experiences when you're operating in a country like India and some of the challenges?
I think from a demand side perspective, government has done enough. We don't want anything from government at all. That's number one. Number two, supply side issues existed. In the last 4 years, all the first 1,000 vehicles that we operated was only one OEM. Now in the last few months, we are seeing MG, we are seeing Tata coming up, we are seeing Hyundai coming up. So we will have plenty of options that enable us to enter into the new market segments, start new services in the city. So supply side issues were there. I think slowly it's getting resolved. Infrastructure issue, I don't believe that's the issue at all, because flowing hydrogen versus LNG versus CNG, and compared to electrons that's flowing across the country, it's easier to tap into electrons and put into the battery rather than putting the hydrogen or LNG into the vehicle. So I believe there's no challenges. It's only the supply side issues that's going to resolve, and we'll have convert all the 5 lakh vehicles being used in the corporate sector to electric.
Okay, since you mentioned infrastructure, let's take each of these critical areas, which will make it success. Let's start with infrastructure. Without it, you're not able to move. You could have vehicles, but you don't have the charging points. You have issues of power supply. Let's get to individual experiences and how you would like to the country to proceed. You have issues with yours. So let's start with you, Rajeev.
So I think it's a great point. We have many challenges on this area, right? So either again we have a choice, wait for the perfect solution or start doing something. So in our case, I will stick to cars because that's what we are doing right now. What we started doing is that, okay, can we think of a solution where we give one charger with the car and the customer has a choice to install at home or office, isn't it? So this is a 7.4 kilowatt charger and the car can be charged in 7-8 hours. So that's number one solution. And it gives you, in our car, the car gives you a range of 340 kilometers. So you're good to go for 2-3 days as an example. Second, we are saying there comes a cable in the car. It's like a phone cable. Correct. You can put into any 15 amp socket anywhere. It will give you top up kind of a thing, 30-40 kilometers range in 1 hour. Second solution. Third, we are saying at our dealerships, there are fast charger through our collaboration. So DC fast charger, 1 hour, it can give you 80% of the charging. The fourth solution, we are saying that if you have to go from here to Chandigarh, in Karnal, in Ambala, at our dealerships, there will be chargers so you can keep charging and move on. The fifth, we are saying, if you are stuck on the road somewhere, God forbid, then we have a mobile charging van. And that mobile charging van will come to you and can again top up for about 30, 40 kilometers in 45 minutes. So this is what we are doing. Whatever government does is Sone pe Suhaga. So government also is saying that we will create infrastructure, highways, thousands of chargers, whatever that happens, so that will be supporting us. So we are saying here, we said, okay, let's make a start somewhere. The 5 solutions what we are giving, in 95, 96% of your problems, range anxiety issue and everything should be taken care of. 3, 4% hopefully, but again, either we keep waiting for the perfect solution or do something. So that's how we are doing it. But once we make a start, and lots of guys are joining us now, and again, the game is of collaboration. So we have collaborated with Lithium, with Excel, all these mobile companies, they are giving us charger. We are investing some crores in infrastructure on our own, right? Which we shouldn't have done it, by the way. That's the government job. But I think we need to collaborate and we need to move together. That's how I can think of it.
Sohinder, can you put on your hat as the Society of Manufacturers for Electric Vehicles, set aside Hero for the moment. What has been the things that you have told the government that needs to be done rapidly for infrastructure if you really have to make the consumer aware and happy and not be, as you're saying, range anxiety setting it?
For two-wheelers, it's a very easy game. So he's talked about car very rightly. But for two-wheeler, in fact, 99% of two-wheelers today have portable batteries. 90% people travel only less than 30 kilometers a day. So one charge gives you 60, 70 kilometers, and the only issue is how do you charge that battery? Because it's portable, you carry it home. It's a 7 kg battery in most of the scooters. So what we have been telling government is no infrastructure really of a huge magnitude or substantial investment is required. What is required is you're telling all malls, office, showrooms to just put charging plugs. And we ourselves from association and from company, we have been doing it successfully. Around 200 dealers across the country have around 25 charging boards installed at Xerox shops, Panwala shops around the vicinity of dealership, where from morning 7 to 10 in the night, they are open. Say if you get stuck, 10 rupees, opportunity charging. Similarly, we have collectively done some PGOs, preferred garage owners. 3,000 garage owners exist in the country who are mechanics, who didn't know anything about electric. They have been trained through the company and association to do first aid maintenance of vehicles. So that infrastructure of servicing now gives confidence to the customer who is on the road. These two things have to be magnified. They have to be amplified. Government can support in just telling people to do it on the building bylaws, on the parking lots, etc. Industry can do it on reskilling. ASDC can help us in that. And if we do it right way, two-wheelers, absolutely no infrastructure required.
But when we're talking about rural areas, I mean, this sounds good in urban areas, but the entire transportation rural areas will still be dependent on your petrol-filled or vehicles that's there. So how do you, in rural areas where electricity supply is a problem, we know that there's huge cuts that's there, there's erratic supply. How do you then move to this large market that's there as well?
See, whatever our experiences, in fact, are more than 60% sales are now not in the main cities. Why? Because this earlier notion of the electricity not being available is not so true right now. Especially during the night, we find there is a slot available where generally people are able to charge their vehicles for 4 to 6 hours, and that's what you need now. And in villages and in rural areas, people find this vehicle much more effective because they go home to home. They don't have to go 3 kilometers behind to fill up a petrol. Secondly, they find that there is not really any service requirement or maintenance requirement. Third, they find it that, okay, from day one, they have started saving out of it. So they don't go for high-speed vehicles, they go for low-speed vehicles. So convenience, comfort, short distances, home-to-home charging, and these are all automatic chargers. You just put it in, it'll charge by itself. 30% of them charge in the tube wells or the pump sets where the electricity is free. So it's again Sone pe Suhaga, so they get nothing on the running cost, etc. So absolutely, it's waiting to happen. Once the reach is there by the manufacturers to open network there, you will see it's actually a product on the low-speed side for the villages of India.
Toyota, and what you think the advice should be for the government if we have to speed this process. Essentially, the companies are doing their own thing, but what can the government do if it needs to do 2 or 3 big things on infrastructure immediately?
I think some of the things that have been said, especially around two-wheelers, etc., are correct. Maybe right now, as volumes are low, charging is not required. It may also be true for a particular usage pattern, but when you start going beyond a 4-5% penetration, when numbers start adding up, a lot of these narratives don't work then. What then you really have to do is you have to find out the right solution. There is no one perfect solution, by the way. What Mr. Gill says about two-wheelers may actually be true. It could be probably possible for the consumer to manage on his own. But for larger vehicles, there could be for commercial vehicles, there could be very different solutions. For example, three-wheelers, it may be so that the right solution may not be charging infrastructure at all. It may actually be battery swapping. A lot of people are working on that. That holds true. The solution for buses would be very different because it's point-to-point, and both charging and battery swap could work there. Cars, it's a different game altogether. But the other thing that you have to look at now is not just these sockets. You have to start looking at the back end. Because right now, remember, the energy demand and the discoms in India are not really the best in terms of financial health and in terms of ship and shape. When demand starts picking up, the distribution companies would need to augment in terms of the transformers, etc. And remember, demand is not only going to come from this segment, it's going to come in a much bigger way from cooling, air conditioning, which is now becoming a passé and a daily thing. So I think you've also got to start looking at and planning the distribution infrastructure, and for that, health of discoms have to be good. I'm talking about long term, I'm talking about scale. The health of discoms have to be good. The capacity to bring in smart charging, which requires both knowledge and money, would be required. Now, on the other issue of, let's say, really moving to mass, when I said you got to really make in India, now the make in India solution I'm not talking about just kind of getting parts and assembling them here. I'm talking about the core going to third, second, fourth level of making it in India. For that, you really need volumes. Currently, it's a chicken and egg story. You don't have volumes, and therefore there's no investment viability. For that, globally, what we've seen, and this is most recent case being in Thailand, the smartest thing to do is being technology neutral, play on policies like carbon taxation, which I mentioned about. What that does is it allows everybody to come in, tap each segment, even segments that are not right now conducive to pure electric, and start getting electrification going at the cost of ICE. And it also gives you a smoother transition. So you don't really have to kill your existing ecosystem to create the new one. And orderly transition need not be a slow transition. And that's visible in many markets. So what that does then is it allows for people to come in, invest for part manufacturing. That sets going a virtuous cycle where you have the local manufacturing scale adding on, prices coming down, and therefore once the price comes down, it adds up and synergizes with all of the interventions, and the adoption curves suddenly starts to look much better.
And since you've experience on scale, when you look at what you've been doing in the last couple of years, running this huge fleet of electric vehicles, what would your advice be to the government if you have to scale it up so that you're not the only player, but there are a lot of them that can do this?
So one thing is, from a policy point of view, there are a lot of policies already been notified at the central level and the state level. Where we see the struggle is more in terms of policy implementation. For example, there's an EV tariff is being announced in Maharashtra, in Telangana, in Delhi, but none of our corporate customers, or none of our car fleets, or none of our charging stations are able to avail that special EV tariff. And that makes the cost of economy, the TCO analysis, the total cost of ownership analysis, looks not in favor of electric if you're using a commercial rate for electrification. So the approach for the government, I request, is that once you have a policy in place, it's also important to see through the implementation part of it. And especially, let's say Telangana, when you have DISCOM who's responsible for implementation, but the policy is made by the Regulatory Commission, and there's a Renewable Energy Development Commission who is the nodal agency. There are multiple stakeholders involved on the government side. I think if we can have an EV cell at the state level to look after the implementation of the policy, I think that will help building the entire ecosystem for electric mobility.
Okay, let's move to the other big issue. Since we started size and scale, if you had to scale up to the kind of numbers we are talking about, 5 million every year as compared to what we are doing, the size of it, what would be the kind of things that you would require the government or your own companies to be doing to do this? Let's start with Rajeev. Since you had this, you've got 2,800, you now have to move to 500,000, which is of course.
So actually, let's get the numbers in perspective.
Right.
So the whole car industry in India is approximately 3 million, right? And the two-wheeler is 20 million. So then you take passenger vehicle and everything else. So if you talk about total automotive industry, and that's the number which is possibly achievable. In car, it will take some time. Also, I think it's a journey. I think we have just started. It has to evolve. And that evolution, what Vikram also was trying to say, is a long-termish thing, 15, 20 years. So I think it will take time. So I will start with one very simple thing that, number one, let's be clear about the policy. The government has to make it absolutely clear whatever basket of technology or technology neutral thing or whatever they want. You know, because so that we stop doing this debate, it's EV or it's hybrid or it's PHEV or maybe combination of it, whatever. So the government has to make this policy very clear, long-termish policy, I would suggest at least 20 years. Then the government says phase-wise manufacturing program that yes, you can import something to start within the next, for the first 5 years, I allow you to import maybe at 0% duty, but in the 6th year, you have to pay 5%, or after that, you have to pay 10%, and maybe massive if you still do not indigenize it. So 20 years program, phase-wise manufacturing program, duty structure, everything, they can make it very clear. It's not very tough, by the way, okay? But sometimes because of the vested interest, we get confused what kind of things you want to do. So government has got a lot of expert and smart guys. They can do this job in the interest of India, and they can do this. The third thing comes infrastructure, right? Then to support that policy execution, what kind of infrastructure you require? Maybe in two-wheelers you don't require it, but for swapping you require it. The distribution companies, by the way, I'm not getting into the problems here. Yes, we face lots of problems. A customer in Bangalore on 30th floor wants to buy a car, and how do I get the cable from his meter at 30th floor to this place, right? 70-meter cable has to be laid down. So guess what we are doing? We have got electricians on our roll now. When you talk about the new jobs getting created, we have got ex-DESU employees, ex-distribution employees on our rolls right now. And they're not related to automotive, right? But that's how we are trying to get the solution. So if you want to buy an EV, our team first will come to your house and we'll do the inspection. How much time it will take? It may take 1 month to install a meter at your place, right? Because to draw the cable. So there are lots of challenges. I'm not getting into that. But on that distribution, everything is possible. And on the scale part, it won't happen tomorrow in rural. So I a little bit don't agree. How do you get into the rural right now today? Let's start with Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore. Let's go to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And one day eventually we go to semi-urban and rural areas. So this whole thing will happen as part of journey. It has to evolve. Everything will not happen today. I won't start selling cars in deeper inside Panipat right now. I'm bothered about selling cars in Gurgaon and Delhi and Noida to start with.
Very good point in terms of policy continuity and a vision 20 years so that you have that thing to invest in. Coming to you, what would you say would be some of the 2 or 3 things that the government or the country needs to do immediately and urgently if we have to meet the targets we've set?
I would pick up on what he said regarding policy clarity. That is an absolute must. But it's a simple thing to say. It's a far more complex thing to figure out. We had 2 sessions in the morning. We had one session where there was a lot of focus on CNG and gas and bioethanol, etc. And there was the other session where we're talking about, and now we are talking about electric mobility. To figure it out, I think you got to do 2 things very clearly for this long-term plan. What's best for the country? And what is it that we are trying to achieve? Are we achieving and talking about some targets related to technology? Or are we talking about societal goals? If it's societal goals, obviously, which it is, what are these goals? It's about fossil fuel reduction, which has an impact on trade deficit. It's about carbon. It's about pollution. It's about manufacturing and jobs. Now, there is no one pathway for all segments. There would be different solutions. There are challenges for all segments are entirely different. And you've got to look at it from a holistic perspective. That's the lesson which we have to pick up from globally. If it's carbon you're figuring out, like somebody said in the previous section, it's not about tailpipe, it's not from factory to the road. It's about, if not well to wheel, it's about life cycle. That's what people are talking about. For God's sake, we're talking about 2-degree goal, which we'll be struggling with. And a 2-degree goal that we aspire to achieve, we cannot isolate ourselves to part of the problem. We have to be holistic. And if it's about fossil fuel imports or energy, it's not about fossil fuel alone, it's about energy import. It's not even about energy import, it's about the whole import. For example, batteries. Of course, battery manufacturing will come in India. And of course, we will, and other parts of people will work. Toyota with Maruti was the first to put up a lithium-ion battery plant. It goes online this year. But do you know that 60% of the battery value lies in the raw materials? Have we figured that out? Have we put it into the equation? It's not to say, please don't go this technology or that technology. All our simple message is, we have to think for India what is best for India. And for figuring out what is best for India, there may not be one solution for all segments, all usage requirements. You got to figure out what's best for what, and you got to think holistically. That's what we think.
So we talked of implementation, and Vikash had mentioned that we have great policy, poor execution. What do you think needs to be done to change that, if you have to get anywhere?
Yeah. See, the battery price reduction is certainly going to be universally in our lap as a good point. The scale is something which we have to create for ourselves. So imagine if these two happen a few years later, who would like to buy an IC engine vehicle? Absolutely no, because of all the advantages you'll set on the total cost of ownership and initial cost. Now there is a journey in between. There is a journey and a bridge in between. And if that is done with the help of other parameters which are going to support it, and one of them is policy and in execution properly, then this race can be run much faster. The catalysis can be done much easily then. So all the efforts are being made is from today till that day when 50% battery price drops to 50%, are we ready through the scale of that? Which means the industry has to take a risk, the business houses have to come out of the shell, especially component makers like Make in India, like Vikram was saying, and even people like us, we have to jump more into it. We are also skimming the surfaces here, just testing it out. And hand in hand, if we work closely with the government works closely with us, and there are myriad solutions now. For example, swapping has come out so well as a solution, but government is agnostic. They don't talk about it right now. There are other means of solutions coming into India. So there has to be an integration between the industry and the government to continually and continuously tweak the policy to create a scale and be in tandem with the battery prices falling down. One day you will find exponential growth, inflection points coming, and everything changing altogether.
Vikash, since you run a fleet of cars, electric vehicles, the largest, is there an Uber moment here, an Ola moment for electric? And if that has to happen, what is the incentives you need so that if tomorrow I want to be friendly, right, environment friendly, rather than have a petrol-driven vehicle, I can dial you guys and say, look, I want an electric vehicle. Right now we have choices, sedan or whatever it is that's there. What can we do in terms of that? Is that possible?
Well, that's definitely possible. It's all about the timing, getting the timing right. So currently...
And I'm also talking of two-wheelers. I'm not just necessarily saying just cars, right?
So from a two-wheeler perspective, I think it's easy to adopt in India. But if you look at the Ola Uber moment, where you use B2C, that means you book through an app, and you want in Gurgaon, you want to go to Greater Noida, it's difficult to do that with the current limited range we have. But imagine a world where you see charging stations every kilometer, and each charging station is capable to either through battery swapping or through the fast charging, whichever technology evolves eventually. You can charge your vehicle in less than 10 minutes. I think if that dense network with the time that requires to charge, if that happens, I think that is the time when Ola Uber moments arrived. I think it will take another 3 to 5 years from here out. But at this time, of course, with new vehicle coming from a luxury segment, the MG having a 350 kilometer range, that is already there. And we are trying to do that from an airport pickup drop perspective, where anyone can call us and any corporate can use us for an airport pickup and drop facility. So that moment has evolving, but not to that level where you can do with any car model. You can't do with Ola Mini, Ola Prime, Ola Sedan, but probably you can do with Ola SUV kind of category where you have 350 kilometer range vehicle already available in the market. Of course, it comes with a price, but that solution exists now. But for a mass scale up, I think we are 3 to 5 years behind that journey.
Okay, I'm going to spend the final part of this session. We've got precisely about, if that clock is right, about 6-7 minutes to go before lunchtime, and I don't want to put you all before that. But sorry, someone said something. Oh, anyway, I was just speaking loud. Yeah, let's just get finally to where can India, you're all put your hands in the business. You know the potential, you know the future better than all of us. Journalists are cynics all the time, so I had to see. But if we had to be a leader in this particular segment, which areas would you advise us to focus on so that this Make in India dream stays that, not imported from elsewhere and we then pass it off as Make in India? So where would you start, Rajeev?
See, I think it has to start with technology, and let's accept the fact right now we don't have anything local as far as cars are concerned, okay? Two-wheelers probably still we have. So I will focus on cars, what I know, right? So on the cars we don't have, and again it goes back to the policy thing. Some of the countries have decided the policy 15 years back for their countries, 20 years back, and right now they are implementing it. Now for us, still we are debating on the policy side, and that's what I say, that however complications it may be, what Vikram was referring to, we have smart people in think tanks, in government, IS officers, and some ministers. I mean, we can decide. I think we are capable to take a good decision, make a good policy for the benefit of the country.
Give us one example of that. If you're saying, let's make policy, where would you want an immediate legislation and say, look, this has to be done. We have a budget coming, maybe they can't add that on, but...
So Raj, I don't know whether you got the subtlety which Vikram was trying to allude, is that still there is a debate going on in the industry, all right, whether you want hybrids or you want PHEVs, you want EV or you want CNG, maybe answer is a basket of all, right? Technology agnostic or EV. So what Vikram, so Raj, you don't know this background, so let me help you, that Vikram is trying to say that whether government should say EV is the way to go, or it should be range of technologies. And that's a very heated debate going on in the industry itself.
No, in the previous session we said, let's make it holistic. Let's not be technology specific. Let's try each and see which is the one that...
So Raj, I think I agree to that, but I'm saying government has to make it clear, right? The government has to make it clear, okay, this is what I'm going to encourage, this is what the direction is, and you guys go and implement. So there's still a doubt in industry mind which way to go to right now. So I think that they have to do it, number one. Number two, in terms of, again, whatever the government decides in terms of policy, suppose they decide, let's say EV, as an example I'm saying. I'm not saying that's the best for the country, let the government decide. But the government says EV, then it comes to battery technology. And in battery, as Vikram was saying, it comes to raw material, the cell. When people say, okay, I'm going to make battery in this country, actually it's assembly, battery assembly to start with. You import cells. And how do you make cells? Cells you make from raw material, and raw material comes from some mines in Africa, as an example. That supply chain part, have you done your homework, right? And where do you make cells? There have to be gigafactories. There are billions of dollars. Who's going to invest that money in billions of dollars? Is that the right technology for us? Or let's encourage R&D, let's encourage some local institutes to have the right technology which you can indigenize and manufacture in this country. So that's the kind of a long-term thing which the government has to do. It's not an easy solution, as he was saying. It's slightly complicated, but I think government has to say, okay, this is what it is. Guys, go ahead and start implementing. So I think still more homework has to be done from the long-term planning perspective.
Okay, let's flip it the other side. Why keep depending on the government? Vikram, you say what you want, right? And say, why is it important that you want this? You make the call and say, look, I think this is the potential. Where would you put that? You can come in, Rajeev, after that. Yeah. I know you want to say something.
No, I think just a clarification. Whatever I've been saying is not around a host of technologies on EV. It's much broader. And you saw that in the morning. You saw talk about CNG as being a potential or whatever. I think the message from the government is quite clear. There is no one solution, and you rightly pointed out it's going to be a host of them. And I think that is correct, because trucking would probably be next to impossible to go to EV in our context. So having said that, one thing which I think is very simple to do, easy to do, very impactful, and takes away all this talk, all this ambiguity, all people saying it's not clear, is what I said, and that's about linking GST to carbon emission, full stop. So it addresses what Mr. Kant was saying, polluter must pay. It addresses people who feel their segments are right there and can reach EV right away. They get the best rewards because on carbon evaluation, at least on tailpipe level, it is the best solution. It also allows you to work on, let's say, ethanol. It allows you to work on many other alternatives. It disincentivizes people who want to work on ICE, on very large vehicles. It checks off on all the boxes. And has it been tested? Yes, most economies. Is it still relevant? Yes, look at Thailand just across the Bay of Bengal. The kind of traction they've got in terms of investments versus the investments, when I say not on assembly of vehicles, in the component side, and the kind of traction we are getting, there is a distinct difference. I think that is a call that we have to take. Mind you, another lesson.
Interrupt. Isn't there a discriminatory GST regime already with FAME 2 there, which you're talking about? For electric vehicles, you all get a much lesser percentage in terms of tax. Hasn't that already been done?
I think FAME, one must be very clear, is a subsidy program, which stays for 2 years. We can't expect it to go on beyond that. What is sustainable is a taxation regime. So taxation regime, which is based upon this carbon taxation I'm talking about, cuts the debate fully. It allows everybody to move in one direction, which is a national goal, and electric will happen, or whatever needs to happen will happen, whether it is in trucking, it's LNG or whatever. Now, just one important point that we've got to look at. China is 50% of electric globally. Right? Their penetration right now is 4%. Last 6 months, and this brings to the point of support. Last 6 months has been very kind of tumultuous for the Chinese EV industry because of government saying that they're going off the subsidies. There's a sharp drop happening. So this also illustrates the fact that the government has to continue to support the EV movement. I think that's another lesson that we have to take. It's not viable on its own right now. It will need continuous support going ahead. And that's where I think your point is in terms of some level of continuity. And that's where my point also resonates with yours. A carbon-based taxation kind of puts all debates to rest and awards completely on merit. And it's not CAFE what I'm talking about.
Okay. You wanted to add a quick point, or can I get, yeah.
I was posted in China in 2011, right? And that point of time, we were talking about what do you do and how do you implement the government policy in 2020, which they initiated in 2002. Okay? So that's the perspective of China. And in China, right now, as Vikram said, the sales have gone down. You know at what level they are? So first they said, okay, we'll give incentive to any car in EV in any category. Just this, it was a carpet bombing, okay? So any producer of EV will get incentive. Then they said, hey man, enough for first 5 years. Now I will do the incentive, I will give the incentive to those companies which are more efficient, and you need to have a minimum 200 kilometers range. The third now, which they have just introduced 6 months back, saying that I will give incentives to only those companies where the cars can do at least 400 kilometers. Okay, here we are still struggling with 100 to 200 to 300. So I think the attention is to details. So they are still going strong, and by the way, their whole supply chain, as I was talked about, they secured their raw material long back from African mines. So that's the beauty of a long-term policy, long-term thinking, and you do it. So again, I think I go back to that. Let's be very clear. If we are talking about EV, and by the way, we believe in that. I'm a convert personally, and we have implemented this, right? MGZS is one example, and we are committed to bring a car below 10 lakhs, hopefully in the next 2-3 years, EV, right? So we will do it, but still long way to go, and the government has to do a lot in terms of clarifying the long-term objective.
I don't want to rush you. I can see the computer right behind me, his shadow falling on this session. So let's quickly wind up on this. We've got 2-3 minutes left to do this. So you're very important in terms of the voice of the industry. What would you say? I mean,
if you're talking of budget and one step that can be announced is there's already a vibrancy from manufacturers, so much offering. Rajeev has created a stir. Two-wheelers, there are so many. So choices are coming. And if you're talking of Saturday, what government should do, I would say what is missing between the customer not buying and buying is just a sticker shock today. If Rajiv's car was 3 lakhs cheaper, you will have 10 times sale. If Ather scooter was 20% cheaper, there would be 10 times sale. For some time, we have to, as an industry, as a government, somehow reduce the sticker shock, sticker price. And that can be done by central government, state government. Delhi is already doing it. You will find the day Delhi EV policy is announced, the sales of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheelers go up in a huge way because they are adding the sweetener to central government. So if center cannot do it, state has to do it. And we are talking extreme short-run sweeteners of direct subsidy to the customer so that they start taking a bite of, if car is 13 lakhs and it is 300 kilometers, why should I not buy? As simple as that. So nothing else, extreme short term, long term, obviously those things. But if you want to turn the whole table, just one step.
And Vikash,
Last point.
Yeah, I actually want you to make a point about mass transportation, buses, right?
Yes.
If we had to convert that fully, as they've, in Delhi and others, what would you want the government to do? I know cars, you've got a solution, but you can add that as well if you want.
No, you heard me right, because I
Yeah.
was going to talk about bus, and I'm glad you asked me to talk about the bus. Mr. Amitabh can't talk about that there's a big focus on the public transport, which is good. But currently there are 1.7 million bus operating in India. Only 10% of that is done by state transport unit. 90% of the remaining bus is operated by the private operators, including the fleet operators who are using that for employee transport, school bus, intercity bus. When it comes to car, the FAME2 subsidy is applicable to fleet operators to get the benefit of the FAME2 subsidy. But when it comes to bus, the fleet operators are not allowed to avail the same facility, which means, in a way, you are telling to us that you do more cars than bus, which is exactly opposite of what you should be doing.
Correct.
So I think that bus should also be given priority for private operators as well. That will help in terms of adoption of electric mobility in bus segment as well, and we would be very much able to lead that change.
Well, I think the government should have been here to listen to such a distinguished panel. Tremendous suggestions that have come. We still have very optimistic about this thing. We need to scale up. So I'm afraid I can't open the session. Let's give them a very, very warm round of applause for this. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
And if I can just invite the panel to stay on the stage, because we have a very short video presentation courtesy of MG, which I think is queued up now.
The world's too big for us to change it on our own. But if each one of us changes what we can, our world, our space, our environment, then we can change the world. All it takes is for you to choose that path, to inspire others to stop and think. Because on your journey, you can already see the change for yourself. And the world will feel it. Now it's your turn. Join the movement. Change what you can with the MG ZS EV.